Amy McEwen. I have been working in health and mental health for about 20 years. So that is my kind of real niche expertise. I guess I'm most known for putting in large health and mental health programs into organizations. I put in Ernst & Young's UK Health and Mental Health Programme as part of their employee relation team. And as a consultant, I write large and small company health and mental health strategies. I've just done a FTSE 100 global strategy. So my real kind of, my bread and butter, I guess, if you like, is health and mental health and putting organisational strategies in place. But I have been for about 20 years, on the side as a sort of passion project, very much interested in women's health, and it's been something that's sort of been a growing part of my life for a long time. And it's really interesting to see kind of that organisations are starting, very slowly to talk about things like periods and menopause and things like that. So this is a sort of like a passion project for me, women's health, but I'm increasingly doing it more and more in my professional life. So that is why I kind of asked We Are the City if we could do a workshop on women's health and mental health. What I will say at the start is I have got time for questions at the end, but let's try and make it interactive. If you've got a question or a point that you want to make as I'm going through, then put it in the chat, because I think it's a lot more useful if you've got things that come up or experiences you'd like to share or things you'd like to know about while I'm talking about it, to sort of do it as we go along rather than at the end. If we have so many of them that we won't finish the content, I'll let you know, but I don't think it'll be a problem. So does that work for people? And the other question I have is, can you actually see me? Because I can see my slides and a blank screen. Can you see me or just hear me? You can see me. Brilliant. Perfect. Fantastic. Right. So just keep sort of chatting away on the chat, and I will answer. And if you've got any questions that come up, then let me know. And my sort of contact details, I'll show them again at the end. So you'll see I've got some stuff on women's health there, and any questions that might come to you later on, just email me. Like I said, I'll show my contact details again at the end. So, just so that you know where I am. So what I thought we'd do today is, we've got an hour. So what I really wanted to get across, my outcomes for today, are the fact that, women's bodies are different to men. It sounds like an obvious fact, but it's actually something that I don't think we really stop and think about a lot of the time. So, my outcomes for today are to explain a little bit about that and why we know so little about women's bodies. Sort of top 8 life rules. These are not rocket science, but I'm going to, these are rules that when I'm working with organizations, I tend to base health and mental health strategies on, but I'm tweaking them for women because I think that's important. Understanding the stress response and its impact on mental health. I think that's really important, because a lot of mental health and a lot of physical health issues kind of come from the stress response, and us knowing how to managing it, recognizing it in ourselves and managing it. And the meat of the topic today is about menstruality and menstrual cycles. So because from my perspective, and having spent sort of 20 years doing menstrual cycle awareness now, a big issue with us understanding women's health and mental health is having a kind of cycle and understanding that we are sort of cyclical creatures. So I do understand that a lot of people on this call might be on the pill. I do understand that a lot of people might be perimenopausal or postmenopausal or things like that. Those are all things I can talk about, but I'm talking specifically about the menstrual cycle as sort of the cycle that we can start to understand our health from. And obviously we can adapt that content to, different people's circumstances. So that's what I hope to get across today. And I'm going to start with like the real obvious, well, it seems obvious, but it's kind of something that isn't really discussed, is that, women's bodies are different to men's. Firstly, we have such a thing as a monthly cycle, which we'll be talking about a lot in a bit, which is sort of monthly huge fluctuations in our hormones. And not only that, we have, a lifetime cycle in that, we start off going through menarche when our periods start, we then have this monthly cycle, and then sort of late 30s, early 40s, we move into perimenopause and that whole process of cycle kind of the menopause. Now, helpfully or unhelpfully, as you like to say, in medical literature, we talk about menopause being the last period, or menarche being a first period. We don't talk about it being the sort of 10 years of hormonal changes that build up to that first or last period. And obviously in the middle of all of that, you know, some of us become mothers, and there's all the processes around hormones, pregnancy, postnatal and things like that. So we have very different bodies to men, just in the way that we are constructed and what we go through throughout our lives and each month. Unfortunately, however, there is very little research done into women's bodies. If you look at medical science, most of the medical science, the studies that are done on new drugs and things like that are done on men. I see a lot in mental health, a lot of the approaches to mental health that are the most kind of popular at the moment, things like cognitive behavioral therapies, are these quite linear, structured therapies, which again, you know, obviously I'm generalizing different, you know, massively here, in that not all men, you know, don't have cycles, and not all women kind of aren't linear, but you know, a lot of the approaches we have to mental health are the more structured kind of linear thinking. And I was reading a report the other day about kind of, we don't really understand female heart attacks, because all of the research done around heart attacks are done on male heart attacks and male approaches and male responses to them. So there's a whole kind of body, we're just starting to realize how little we know about women's bodies and women's bodies in health. And drugs and interactions, like I said, most of the research on pharmaceuticals is done on men. And I was also quite horrified to read earlier on this week, while I was researching for this, that if you're experimenting on mice in early stage treatments, an early stage pharma, then often if you are using female mice, you will remove their ovaries. So you will remove the hormones and the hormonal responses to drugs when we're testing them. So basically, we don't really know a lot about women's bodies, how they interact with drugs. We're just way behind in terms of our body knowledge. Secondly, I put, you know, we store emotions in our physical bodies. From what research that we have is that actually physical and mental effects, you know, the medicine world has kind of split physical health and mental health. You know, my father was a psychiatrist, so he did his medical degree and then he learned about the brain and psychiatry. We've kind of created through medicine this structure where physical health and mental health are two very different things. But actually, I can tell you from the research I've seen, but also there's a new study in psychoneuroimmunology. And also, I mean, I've been doing yoga 20 years. I'm sure a lot of you do yoga. You can see the physical impact on your body from emotional stress, from illness. You know, illnesses are shown to be caused by emotional stress. There's the psychoneuroimmunology now, really good body of evidence that shows that a lot of diseases that we have as people are from an emotional source. So we store it in our physical bodies, but we have this disconnect between the head and the felt response, largely because the way that we educate people and the way that medicine is run, you know, there's the physical and the mental response. But secondly, I think we're missing a trick when educating young girls, especially around how they feel. You know, how when we very much live in our brain of logic and thinking as opposed to how we feel about things. That's where mindfulness has sort of suddenly taken a big kind of leap forward in the last sort of 10 years, is teaching people about the felt response. How does my body feel? You know, is there a disconnect between my logical brain and my felt response? And that's something that, you know, we were not taught. So people are starting to move into mindfulness and to headspace and calm and things like that. But it's really getting over that head and felt response. And for me, that's even more pivotal for women, because we do have our felt response changes at different points of our cycles, depending on where we are hormonally. So it's that kind of disconnect. And again, generalizing massively, but women often need time out, solitude to recover or heal. If you go back to mythology, and I do kind of quite enjoy reading our old stories, you've got the kind of Fisher King and the Handless Maiden. So the Fisher King is the male myth. It's the kind of hero. The man, every film we see is about this. Man has a problem, goes off by himself, solves problems, saves the world, and, you know, everyone cheers. He's gone off. It's the kind of hero's quest. Whereas if you look at the female mythology, it was always about women, in order to solve something, needed to take time out, go into the forest, go and heal. And so there's that kind of, how, obviously generalizing, that's how women generally deal with things, is needing time out, solitude to recover or heal, which in the world we've built for ourselves of 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on this, and often, you know, women doing the bulk of childcare as well as jobs, it just doesn't really happen. So what I'm hoping to get across to you in the sort of next sort of 45 minutes is that self-care, and that's what this is all about, is about knowing and trusting yourself, who you are, right? Making the right choices for you. So empowered choices and conscious choices. So that is without judgment. That's making sure, you know, that your choice might be that, you know, you're on the pill, it works for you, you know, hormones are affected by that, but that's your choice. There is no judgment and there are no right or wrong choices. It's about making the right choice for you and making that choice from an empowered or conscious place. And I think, you know, for women, that's quite difficult because a lot of the knowledge about what you can base your decisions on hasn't been there or hasn't been obvious. So that's what I'm trying to get across over today. If I move on to my next slide. So why does this all matter? Well, it matters because I think what we see is women have different health, but very specifically, very different mental health conditions than men. So whenever I work with an organization, the people that tend to come forward when I'm running mental health networks or who are most interested in health and mental health strategies tend to be women. I think that's largely because women tend to talk about it more and are more open to talk about it more. Certainly in some of the organizations I've worked, the only way I could get men into a room to talk about mental health was to dress it up as a performance thing. If they could improve their performance by knowing this stuff, as opposed to a health thing. So women do tend to talk about it more. But again, in doing research for this talk, you know, I wanted to really get down to the empirical data. And you know, there are higher rates of some mental health conditions that women have. So women have higher rates of depression and anxiety than men. That is a fact, and it's evidenced both here and in the United States and in all of the places that I looked. I think part of that is hormonal, and I'll come on to the next point in a minute. I think a lot of it, from my experience, is also women not really understanding their own health and mental health, their own cycles, and also I think a lot of it is societal as well. The sort of different pressures that there are on being a woman and the different expectations, especially around motherhood, around work, you know, kind of can see now with the gender equality and pay gaps and things like that. So it is different. It's a different experience to walk through life as a woman on this planet as is to men. In some conditions, women might have the same condition as a man, but they'll have different symptoms. And there are some mental health disorders that are completely unique to women, and they're to do with hormone changes. So perinatal, postnatal depression, that's an obvious one. Premenstrual dysphoric disorder, this is a quite recent diagnosis, but it's to do with that period of time that society is kind of labeled premenstrual tension, but this is an actual mental health condition that's now in the DSM-5 to do with hormone changes at that time. And then the perimenopause related depression. So, you know, what I'm trying to get across from this slide is I think not understanding ourselves and our bodies and how our hormones work and how those hormones can affect mental health conditions, you know, not only makes us more susceptible to certain mental health conditions, but also I think some of the symptoms that we see and the rates that we see are related to that. No one's put a question or a comment yet, so I mean I am carrying on, but if there is something that comes up or something you agree with or disagree with or want to ask, then please, you know, do come on. I am keeping an eye on the chat. So that's kind of on women's mental health. These are my top 8 life rules. They started out at 7, but because number 8 is, I think, the most key, I've made it into 8. And again, this might seem really obvious, and it is really obvious, but it's one of those things that being really obvious and actually doing are two very different things. So as I said, when I work with organizations, I spend a lot of my time looking at what health and mental health comes to them and what good health and mental health is. And this has been kind of refined over numerous times of working with organizations, but I think it always comes down to this. Yes, you will, Suzanne, it's being recorded. So the number one is respecting your body and mind. So again, really simple, really obvious one, but actually really hard to put into practice some of the time, because it's understanding that your body and mind are connected, but it's also giving yourself the space and the time to fulfill your needs, which is often a real challenge. I've done a lot of work in women's circles and on women's apprenticeships and on women's courses, and a common theme that comes up is about often women are caregivers. We often put our own needs last in terms of family and work colleagues and parents and things like that. So it's about respecting your own body and mind and giving yourself what you need. I'll be coming into, over the course of the talk, ways of doing that. And I'll be showing these again at the end, and you're welcome to have my slides. But it's just a really obvious one, and just understanding that the most important thing about looking after your body and mind is you, and you're giving yourself permission to do it. Again, really obvious, getting adequate amounts of rest and sleep. It is really obvious, but it's something that most of us don't do particularly well. And I was thinking, because I was watching The Crown a few weeks ago, about Margaret Thatcher and how amazing it was at that point in time when we had a woman running the country as well as the Queen. But the behaviour of Margaret Thatcher and the behaviour now, really, around the city, around organisations we work in, is that it seems to be a badge of honour if you can get away with having 4 or 5 hours sleep at night. Margaret Thatcher was famously always telling people that she only slept for 4 or 5 days and 4 or 5 hours a day, and how little she slept. And actually, a lot of the research now, there's a whole body of research shows that if you are sleep deprived, it's as bad for your physical and mental health. It messes up your hormones, it messes up your insulin, you're more likely to put on weight, you're more likely to come eat. It's terrible for your physical and mental health. But it also, in terms of your cognition and your ability to do things, you come across as drunk. Being sleep deprived has as much impact on your brain as being drunk. So we've got this weird society where we're checking our emails last thing at night and first thing in the morning. If we get tired during the day, it's we don't often allow ourselves to go off and have a nap or sleep. We live in this kind of Protestant work ethic. You work, you carry on, you do things, anything to stop your body sleeping. And in yoga, it's always really interesting to me when we do yoga nidra or some of the slower yogas, that people fall asleep. And one of the questions they always ask the yoga teacher is, I was trying to do a meditation or mindfulness or yoga nidra and I fell asleep. And the answer is, well, you fell asleep because you're tired, because your body's not been getting enough rest. So, while it sounds really obvious, get adequate amounts of rest and sleep, it's actually hard to put into practice. And exercising often and sensibly and not to excess. I think this is really important for women as well. That and the one underneath it, which is about having a healthy shape and a body image. I deliberately don't use the words weight. I deliberately don't use the word diet. But there is this whole thing around body image and women and the shapes that we see in the media and how we have been taught to exercise and those images that kind of that I think really need thinking about. I'm going to show you some books later, but especially when we talk about the menstrual cycle, about food, because a lot of the exercise programs that we see out and about nowadays, they're very extreme. It doesn't seem okay to just go for a walk anymore. It has to be a triathlon, and it can't just be a triathlon, it's got to be an ultra marathon or CrossFit. We seem to have polarized, and I see this in the yoga world as well. You've either got the very extreme Ashtanga fast yogas or the lying flat on your back. We seem to have polarized both exercise and diet, that it's completely the diet that we have is sort of, it seems to be okay in a lot of diet programs to just cut out food groups like carbohydrates. And one of the books I've got about the cycle, she gives example of women that cut out carbohydrates and the impact it had on their hormones and cycle. So when I put in points 3 and 4, it's about balance. Everything is about balance. It's about eating a healthy diet of health food, eating of whole foods, not cutting out major groups, not starving yourself for months and then binge eating, about having a healthy balance. And the same with exercise. Callie's just put about having exercise helps her having a heavier sleep. Yes, exercise is one of the best things you can do for yourself in terms of sleep, in terms of physical, in terms of everything. If you don't do it too much, it is as bad to exercise too much or rigorously as it is to do nothing. And I see a lot of women, especially the sort of very high power flying city women, who are in these, and I'll come on to my next section is about the nervous system response. But balancing a very, very heavy job, hard working job, with extreme exercise, which is what seems to happen now, is actually the worst thing you can do, in that you're not allowing your nervous system to charge down, in a way that you are if you did smaller amounts of exercise or less exercise. So I put this here because I think, again, I'm not here to judge. I'm just here to offer ideas. And I think it's about being really clear what you're exercising for or what you're eating and why you're making those decisions and what those decisions are based on, and whether they're based on the right things in terms of self-care. In being emotionally self-aware, same thing. So it's about, and we'll come on to that with the menstrual cycle, understanding where you are and who you are and your feelings, and allowing yourself to have feelings, and allowing yourself to sit with uncomfortable feelings and understand what's behind them, and not beating yourself up if you respond due to a feeling, but over time starting to build this emotional self-awareness. And like I said, that a big part of that is understanding your hormones and where you are with them. Number 6, drinking adequate water. Obvious, but most people do it. Bianca, you've put, what do you think counts as extreme exercise? It varies per person, but just a general idea. It does vary per person. I'm going to come on to the stress response with hormones and with nerves, which will hopefully help you answer that question. But to me, extreme exercise is when you are exercising for the wrong reasons, or you're exercising when you're tired, or you're exercising, it's something you do as opposed to, because you have to exercise because that's what you're always doing. It's your habit, and you're not working with yourself, and in my 20s, I was 40 over lockdown, which is a little bit disturbing. But I suddenly realized that actually, the difference between 20, I would just plow through, everything was plowing through, very quite masculine, even if I was tired, you exercise because that's what you do. Whereas now, I will sit for a minute or two and feel, it's what I meant about that felt response. Do I really need to do a really full-on exercise class now? Should I be doing anything at all? Should I be going for a walk? And actually allowing yourself to back off from the extreme stuff. Unfortunately, it's quite hard to do, especially if you are in an adrenal response and you're working in an adrenal response, kind of your adrenal system, what it wants is the opposite to what it needs. So what it wants is to keep the adrenal response coming up, as opposed to going off and doing something like a lighter swim, where you're allowing your endorphins to come in and eat your stress hormones. So a long-winded answer to your question, Bianca, is it does vary, but it's about sometimes what you need is to go and have a really good run and really sweat cardio sessions. Sometimes it's the actually opposite thing of what you need, but it's about being able to come from the experience of, what does my body need now? What does my system need now? Am I exercising just because I want to be thin, I want to have a cake, I want to do this? Or am I doing it kind of in a way that's a whole-bodied way? I don't know whether that answers your question, but that's kind of where I'm coming from with that. Drinking adequate water, obvious, amazing how few people do that. Coffee and alcohol in moderation. The main issue I have with coffee and alcohol, and believe me, I love both of them, is how it affects your sleep. So coffee, the half-life of coffee means that it stays in your system for 4 to 8 hours. So having 2 or 3 coffees in the morning can actually be what prevents you sleeping well that night. I have tried numerous times to give up coffee, and I can't, because I do love it. So I've now had 1 coffee in the morning, which I really, really, really enjoy. Yeah. So Yeah, Callie, I mean, a lot of people do like exercising, and it's a really good thing. I'm not saying don't exercise. I'm just saying with all of these things, it's about often and sensibly, not to excess. So my big thing is balance. You know, all of these things in moderation and balance are good. You know, I eat everything, I drink everything, you know, but it's in balance, you know, and knowing why and making an empowered decision as to why you're doing something. So coffee and alcohol. Coffee, yeah, you know, it just affects your sleep. Alcohol, it doesn't just affect your sleep. How women and women's bodies process it is very different to men's. So again, a lot of the research done on men, we store alcohol in our bodies longer, it is absorbed in our fat systems more, in our hormones, it leads to breast cancer more. You know, there are different responses to the female body with alcohol than the male. And the thing that's happened to me, which, you know, has happened since I've had my children, is that alcohol just completely destroys my sleep now. So if I have more than 2 glasses, well, firstly, you know, 1 or 2 glasses is the maximum, because I think all the research shows if you have more than that, then it affects your rapid eye movement sleep. So the sleep you have that night isn't as deep and isn't as good, and then you end up in this cycle where, because you've not slept properly, you tend to have more coffee, and then because you can't sleep because you've had a coffee, you have more alcohol, and there's a sort of cycle. So I'm not saying don't drink alcohol or don't drink coffee. I'm just saying, you know, be aware of the physical impact it has on you and on your brain, and it also can be counterintuitive to the rest and sleep. Callie, struggling with emotional eating, that's actually a very strong statement, but the point behind that I think is really important is that knowing that you have that, again, it's about knowing. That's the first step. So it's the coming from empowered consciousness. You know, I've had to, because my weakness and my family weakness is alcohol, so over time I've had to learn how to ask myself when I'm having a glass of wine, am I having this glass of wine because I want it, or am I having it because there's an emotional need? And funny enough, my next question was about avoiding smoking and recreational drugs. I used to smoke on and off from kind of my 20s. My last cigarette I had was when I found out I was pregnant with my daughter. And it was interesting because having had a child, I got myself out of the habit of smoking. And then when every so often I'd have, God, I really feel like a cigarette. And I'd sit with it and I'd think, well, I have not smoked for like 5 years. You know, you clearly don't want a cigarette. What is it that you want? And I was very interested to read that in homeopathy, people use tobacco for emotional regulation. So I realized that what happened was that that needing a cigarette, or thinking I needed a cigarette, was actually my cue that I was emotionally off balance. And that actually, rather than going and having a cigarette, which I actually didn't really need, I then sort of sat with that and sat with the quite uncomfortable feelings, and generally managed to work through them, and haven't smoked since. So that's the sort of thing I mean about an empowered and conscious decision. But I'm fully aware that it was the having my child and going through the pregnancy and breastfeeding that gave me enough of a breaking the habit to then be able to look at the empowered decision behind smoking. So that's what I'm saying. It's about thinking about why, if you are emotional eating and things like that, you know, it's the empowered decision. And Amanda's saying, yeah, it is, nicotine's truly evil. It took me 2 years to quit for good. Yeah, I mean, you know, it's interesting in that I've had a discussion with my father, like, our family weakness is alcohol. Not cigarettes, actually. I didn't find nicotine that difficult to give up, but it's everybody's different, and everyone has different, the crutch is different. For some it's over exercising, for some it's emotional eating, for some it's drinking, for others it's recreational drugs, and again, there's no judgment. It's understanding who you are. This is all about self-care and understanding what that behavior is really about. Is it about that you really want to take a recreational drug or smoke, or is it that you're feeling uncomfortable about something and you're trying to self-soothe that uncomfortable feeling? And then number 8, knowing where you are in your cycle. So that is the crux of it all, because all of these things above, you know, how you feel, your hormones, how much sleep you get, the quality of that sleep, exercise, is affected by the hormones of where you are in your cycle. So this is just a quick slide. We have had the most bizarre year I think any of us have ever lived with. Obviously COVID, all of the research so far is showing that COVID is affecting women more than it has affected men. Really interesting piece of research that showed that when lockdown first hit in March, the number of academic papers published by women fell off a cliff, whereas for men it carried on as it was. So really interesting stuff around this year in terms of women. Women tend to be the ones losing the jobs. Women tended to be the ones doing more of the care at home, providing emotional balance to the families. I am an utter optimist though. So my strong hope is that actually what 2020 will have given us when we look back is the realization that actually working from home and having more flexible lifestyles is something that can be carried on. You know, a lot of I found it interesting that despite the fact that a lot of firms talked about flexibility, their flexible working policies were very limited, and it took everyone being sat at home for 3 months for them to actually realize that the world didn't end and that productivity could keep up. So once we have got through this year, I'm hoping we rebuild in a positive way. That said, you know, we seem to be globally at the most strange time for women's rights that I've ever, you know, since the end of the Second World War. So I can only hope that kind of we continue up moving and we don't lose what little rights and progress we have made. So I put this in here because I'm going to now talk quickly about stress and then move on to the menstrual cycle, just because I want to give you the understanding of this is what we've experienced this year is a very extreme version of stress. Most of the people I speak to, it's either feast or famine. If they've got jobs, they're working all hours that God sends and they've never worked, you know, and are absolutely desperate to get back to the office and see human beings. Or if they don't have a job, the stress has been complete boredom. So it seems to be feast or famine. But I'm hoping that 2020, when we sort of shake out of it, will have been the turning point in a positive. But like I said, I'm always an optimist. So what is stress? Stress is not a mental health condition. Stress does not appear in the DSM-4 or the DSM-5, which is what we use to diagnose mental health conditions. It's the book where we diagnose mental health conditions. Stress is a state. And it's a state when things happen to you, stressors happen to you. I'll be showing you that in a minute. And when stressors happen to us, there are many symptoms. The symptoms that we have are psychological, they're physical, they're behavioral. You know, they are things that happen to us as a result of a stressor. And they are things that, you know, if stress is applied for a long time, build. Right, so if you look through these lists, you'll see many things that you notice there. And again, stress affects everybody differently. And one of the things that my father said that was very interesting about his career as a psychiatrist, he specialized in stress and anxiety and depression, is that somebody could do the same job for many years. And then one day, bang, you know, kind of stress or mental health condition. Likewise, other people would react to the same job in different ways. So the thing about stress is it's completely subjective. And it's not just subjective, it's subjective to where you are at the time. So it's kind of, you know, you can be doing the same thing every day, but then things change and you can no longer carry on with what you've been doing. So that is what stress is. It is down to our hardwiring. So the stress response is a response of our nervous system. So we have two nervous systems. We have the central nervous system, which is the spine and the brain, and we have the autonomic or the involuntary nervous system. So that is the nervous system that controls all of the things that we just don't think about. So even when we're asleep, our blood pumps, our digestion works, we breathe, we produce hormones, we produce glands. You know, that is the autonomic nervous system work. It's the part of our nervous system that isn't about moving limbs or thinking, it's that runs the rest of the body. And that nervous system is split into two parts, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. So the sympathetic works with the endocrine system and is predominantly fight or flight. So if you think about fight or flight, if you think about how kind of human beings evolved, you know, we evolved from kind of the forests into the grassy savanna grasslands. And, you know, our kind of how we managed to survive was not being eaten by animals such as saber-toothed tigers. So we kind of evolved this nervous system, which is that if there is a threat, such as a saber-toothed tiger bearing down on us, our sympathetic nervous system just takes over. And it's your fight or flight system, now called the fight, flight, or freeze system, because there's been some really interesting books published recently that say that one of the things that our system does is it can freeze. Like some animals freeze rather than fight. But basically, that sympathetic nervous system, it gets you ready to run away. So you know, everything in your body that doesn't need to be in terms of saving your life, you know, stop. So it decreases your enzymes, it brings blood vessels constrict, you know, you increase your volume of breath so that you can breathe, you know, kind of your urine output decreases, everything contracts. So it's to do with that fight or flight response. The parasympathetic is the contrary to that. So that is the opposite. So that is how you relax after your sympathetic nervous system. So, you know, the two work in parallel. So your sympathetic nervous system is balanced by your parasympathetic nervous system. The trouble that we have is that we've created a world in which, you know, we're on all the time. And actually, you know, there's been some wonderful books and programs on recently about digital and health and apps and the attention economy, and the fact that Facebook and all of our emails and things are designed to give you dopamine hits. You know, for every click that you make on social media, 7,000 people have worked to try and make you click, you know. And I've got this interesting experiment going on with Facebook at the moment, where, having used it quite a lot, I haven't been using it, or Instagram, for a long time, and it is desperate for me. I'm getting emails, I'm getting text messages, it's desperate for us to come back. So the point being is that the world we live in now, our sympathetic nervous system, which used to only be, you know, kind of set off when we were running away from threats, is now on most of the time. And the parasympathetic nervous system, which is opposite, which brings us down and relaxes us, is not on enough. And that has long-term impacts. If you look at the causes of death for most people now in the West, it's the chronic illnesses, and that's your parasympathetic nervous system not allowing your guts and your kidneys and your liver and your other things to relax. And in answer to your question, Bianca, you know, excessive exercise to me is something that does not allow you to have a parasympathetic response, because the exercise you're doing is triggering that sympathetic response. So if you've done a 70-hour week in work, you've pretty much been living off your sympathetic response and the hormones I'll come on to in a minute that are associated with that. If your exercise to then recover from that is a very intense exercise, then you're still using that sympathetic response. And you can do that for years before you fall over, but eventually you will fall over. And that's what I mean by excessive exercise. It's just being aware of what you're doing, and actually should, rather than running a triathlon, I'd be going for a gentle swim and doing some mindfulness. You know, those are the sorts of questions to ask yourself. This is all tension headaches. Yes, Arlene. So that is a really, really good example of a tension headache. And the fact that you know it's a tension headache means that you know that it's probably your jaw and your neck and your shoulders. And I know myself, I have a trigger, which is whenever I've done anything very stressful and I've been really pushing myself for a long period of time, my whole right side of my body and neck locks up. So it's knowing the physical response to stress. And it's knowing how to what works for you. And I'll come on to that in a minute to recover. I'm not going to waste a lot of time on this slide, but I just wanted to show you that when the sympathetic nervous system is running, that fight or flight response, it is producing adrenaline and cortisol. So there is a whole hormonal reaction as well as an electrical nervous system reaction that's going on in your body. So it affects your glucose, your insulin, all of that stuff. So you've got your adrenal cortex pumping out cortisol, your adrenal medulla pumping out adrenaline. Your body and your system is flooded with that. What you want to be doing is some sort of exercise or some sort of stress response that will produce endorphins. So endorphins eat stress hormones, but also your serotonins, your oxytocins, all of those things, the different hormones that are more linked to the parasympathetic. So I just wanted to show that there's a chemical response as well as a nervous system response. And this is, you know, the stress response. So you have stressors, that's on the left hand side. These are things that happen to you: work, children, you know, COVID, lack of a Brexit deal, the fact that the world that we know is completely imploded and you are having to live with uncertainty. Those are your stressors. Your stress response is how you respond to those. And that's really what I would encourage you to spend time exploring. I discovered that I knew I was out of balance when I would avidly look at social media. So if I had 10 minutes off, right, I wouldn't go off and do a 10-minute mindfulness track, but I would sit and look at what was going on in the news, whether someone had responded to this, my LinkedIn. And to me, that's a really good barometer. The number of times and the times that I'm checking social media lets me understand how stressed I am, even if I haven't realized it yet. For you, you'll figure out your stress response. It could be snapping at your husband, it could be doing something else, but everyone has a response that they do to a stressor. What we want to do is move into, we want to let the stress respond and then let the response cycle out. So the green boxes are the ones on the right hand side, are the ways of getting stress out of your system, allowing that nervous system response to complete and the parasympathetic nervous system to come in, or allowing the release of endorphins and serotonins. And that can be through moving, so that's your exercising. It could be through dancing, it could be through singing. My little daughter's just been doing some exams, and when I saw her brain kind of start to crumble in the middle of work, I would take a 10-minute time out and I'd put Gangnam Style full volume in the kitchen, and we would dance round the kitchen for Gangnam Style, which would get her moving, it would get her out of her head, it would get everything flowing, and it would allow that stress response to complete so that she could then kind of do something else. So moving, women, all of the research shows that moving, women, you know, like dancing, creating, singing, laughing, all of those things, connecting, obviously that's been more challenging, you know, crying, you know, we've got a weird society where people don't like to cry. They see crying as a sense of weakness, you know, as opposed to actually it's part of your stress response completing. And I was watching my 2-year-old, because, you know, my 2-year-old, I took him to the zoo yesterday and he fell off a wall he was walking on. Quite a big drop, and he was in shock, and he sort of cried, and I picked him up and he shook it out of his system. You know, he finished his stress response and he was off to see the butterflies. Just like if you watch some of the David Attenborough programs, you see animals freezing, but then you see them shaking. They're shaking the adrenaline and the cortisol out of their systems. So their stress response is finished and they've moved on to the next thing. So it's about living in the moment. But what we need to understand is how we respond to stressors, what is a healthy way of responding to stressors, and what we need to do as individuals to complete our stress response, be it talking about the problem with something else, dancing, singing, moving, going to a yoga class, going for a run, but something that will allow that response to go, allow the parasympathetic nervous system to kick in, you know, clear the adrenaline and cortisol out and move on. So that hopefully is, and what I wanted to show you here, this is the last thing on stress before I move on to menstrual stuff. This is a stress performance curve. And it basically shows that there is a optimum amount of stress that people can have. So I am one of those people, if you ask me to do one thing in 2 weeks, I don't do it because I get into the too little stress stuff. So, you know, I need enough going on in my life that I kind of feel like I am doing something. If I don't do anything at all, then it's sort of, you get into the boredom, difficulty focusing, depression, apathy. So you need a bit of stress to get to your peak performance or on top of your game. The challenge that we have, and I think what we've seen with 2020 specifically, is that if you go beyond that to too much stress, panic, anxiety, burnout, you get into the kind of illness. And it's when you've got too much stress in your system, when that parasympathetic system is not working and your system is being run by your adrenals and your adrenaline, that's when you get into too much stress, and that's when you will burn out eventually. Whether that burnout is a mental health condition, whether it is a physical illness that manifests as a mental health condition, you know, it is down to the individual, but kind of how it manifests is it's the too much stress in the system and not enough discharging of the stress response. So I want to move on to cycles because I think that's key, and I've completely got no idea what the time is. So let me, can someone just type in what the time is, please? So I've massively overrun, I imagine. But I wanted to give you some understanding. Perfect. Oh my goodness, is it that already? Wow. I haven't even gone to the cycle. My goodness. So I will whiz through the cycle because that is really key. I'm going to, if you've got questions, put them up. But what I wanted to show you is the physical and mental response to our bodies. And then I'm going to come on to the women are cyclical beings bit, because this is where I really wanted to leave it with you. You know, this is a month cycle of a woman, right? This is how our hormones change in that cycle. So all of the things I talked about in my first 8 life rules are changing every single month because of our hormones change. And I love this diagram because it shows how we are changing at all points of our cycle. And as I said, you know, we can come on to discussions about menopause and perimenopause and pills and stuff like that. But this is, you know, the female cycle. This is, I'm going to show you a couple more diagrams. Yes, I will happily share the slides, and that's absolutely fine. And you can contact me if you have questions later. I've got my contact details at the end. You know, what I wanted to show you with the circle on the left is that cycle that we just showed you, the picture here, this is what's going on in a month. That's what it looks like if it's flat. So you've got different stages of the cycle. And I've got 4 trees. I'm going to show you in a minute some other ways of picturing this. But the 4 trees are basically the months of the year, the seasons of the year. And I've done a lot of work in menstruality with some amazing women. And I came into this work with Alexandra Pope and Red School, and she talked about the seasons. And I think it's a really, really effective way of showing women about the cycle. Obviously, this is the cycle I'm talking about of a month, but the same thing happens over a lifetime, right? Put simply, winter, where we are now, midwinter, you know, is your bleed. It's when you menstruate. It's what's going on, kind of the energies around a woman when she menstruates. So for a lot of people, it's when you're bleeding, it's you are tired, you are inward, you are achy, you want to be by yourself. It's that sort of, you need to rest and restore, just like we are at the moment. Ironically, I feel like 2020 and COVID is probably going to be the winter where we are most doing what we should be doing in winter, i.e. nothing and hibernating, because normally at this time of year we're rushing around trying to fit an entire year's worth of partying into the 2 darkest, busiest weeks of the year. Ironically, because everything's shut this year, we might be doing what animals do in winter, which is hibernating. And that's what women should be doing during their bleed. Resting, chilling out, getting their energy back. And I was always taught by Alexandra that is the anchor for the cycle. If you give yourself a good couple of days resting when you are bleeding, you are recharging your system for the whole of the next cycle. Spring, you know, the pink leaves is that bit between menstruation and ovulation. So that is when the cycle is blooming, your energy is in, you're becoming creative, you know, that kind of like everything is possible, lots of ideas and lots of creativity. Summer, ovulation. So that's the point in your cycle when all of your hormones and everything are about producing an egg, getting pregnant, you're at your most fertile, you know, everything's easy, you've got lots of energy, it's lots going on. And then that bit that we describe as premenstrual tension is actually autumn. And what that's about is about your system wanting to start going inward, preparing for that bleed, getting tired, pulling ourselves in, our hormones are dropping away, enabling that cycle to bleed. And I think, you know, the tension that we talk about in society is that actually the rest of the world is carrying on in its 24/7 busyness, and actually you want to retreat and go inwards. So it's learning that a lot of the menstrual work, and I'm going to give you loads of links and stuff you can look into, but it's about recognizing these 4 parts of the cycle. And someone's put a question up, should you exercise during August? Do you mean in the cycle, Amelia, or do you mean in August in general? But the point of the cycle is that this is what happens to us each month, and it's about starting to understand it and recognize it and actually working with it. Yes, in the cycle. So the answer to that, Amelia, is it's up to you to figure out what works best for you. I'm going to show you some slides to enable you to do that. This is just a different depiction. If you go onto the internet, these are all taken from the internet. These are all different images around this. But what it is it's the menstrual cycle and what you go through 28 days a month, or however long it is for you, 28, 30, 32, 34, however long, but understanding the energies. This one on the right is by Alexandra Pope and Red School, and this is the one she uses, and she talks about crossover days in between these seasons, which is when you start to feel, it's like it's when you start to feel the energies of the next season, and it's and you can have a wobble that day. And my very good friend Elaine, who runs the most wonderful mindfulness for the menstrual cycle course that I've got a link for in my next slide, talks about you as a woman understanding by mapping what is going on for you. Menstrual cycle awareness is by taking the time each month, each day, to write a few words down about how you feel, and over time understanding what is going on for you with your cycle and what's going on for your health and mental health. It sounds crazy, but I know that day 4 of my cycle I have a real wobble. I also know that day 24 I suddenly hit a wall because my energy just runs out, and that's the day that the radio's too loud and the kids annoy me, and anything my partner says I want to hit him. So that's the sort of, it's knowing those days, but it's only through understanding and starting to understand my cycle, or as my friend Elaine says, understanding your map and how it applies to you, so you start to understand the patterns. And let me show you, I've pulled one out. It doesn't have to be difficult. This is something you can get from the internet. If you look, this is one I'm doing at the moment as part of Elaine's course. Each day I write 3 words into how I felt that day. And then, over time, this was last month, this was the month before, you build up and you can start to look through patterns. So this doesn't have to be a lot of work, but it's getting to know yourself and where you are. And from that, being able to make decisions around health, mental health, or is it, maybe my depression is that I'm actually not ever resting during my period. And then over time, once you've got that awareness, it's starting to weave that into your world of work. So I have learned, it's taken me a long time, that if I am day 27, 28, 29, making a decision is not very good. And if I'm pushing myself to get a work done, actually I'm much better off if I can, especially if I'm writing, and I do a lot of writing, waiting a couple of days and using my spring energy as I come out of my cycle. And I can do what would have taken me 3 days over autumn and winter in half a day, or even a couple of hours, because I'm playing to my energies. And this slide here, again from the internet, there's lots of them, and I've got some books, just shows you how to start once you recognize where you are in your cycle and what patterns you have, adapting your exercise, what you eat, how you might feel to you. And as Elaine said, it's not about a map. It's not that everyone's days 14 to 21 you need to do this, but it's about figuring out what works for you and making the right choices for you over time, and kind of starting to get in with that. So that I'm going to leave there. This is where I started. You can use for your team. Yes, San, and there's also loads of really good links I can give you if you email me for teens and girls going through menarche and stuff like that. There's an awful lot of work going on, because I think there's a realization that actually women weren't taught this at the right age. So I can happily send it to you, and I can send you some links. But back to the original slide, which was this 8 different tips. The reason I put knowing where you are in your cycle is, that craving for a cigarette might actually be because you're day 24 and you've been slapped with autumn energy and it's really uncomfortable for you. Different women have different parts of their cycles they enjoy the most, and different women have different parts of their cycles that they struggle with and they, or bring up uncomfortable feelings. Likewise, the exercising so often and sensibly is affected by where you are with your hormones and where you are with your cycles. Likewise, food, are you using food as an emotional crutch because it's actually linked into your cycle? Sleep, there's 2 days of my cycle I can't sleep properly. It's usually about 2 days before my period starts, because it's a hormonal response. So it's thinking through these things, and what I like about the cycle is having a container to understand it. And the last thing I wanted to talk to you about was this, very quickly, this image on the left hand side. I've been using this for 20 years, and it shows 4 different types of health: mental health, spiritual health, which can be kind of anything that gives you that peak experience of being in the flow; cognitive, that's our thinking skills; and physical. And what I encourage people to do, as well as follow the 8 rules, is to just have a think each week to make sure that they are covering something in each of these boxes. So you'll all have periods of your life where you're really busy and you're so flat out at work that you have just spent about 90% of your waking hours in cognitive, but actually what you need to be thinking, and what I try and do when I plan my week, is, right, what 3 things am I going to do for exercise this week? What am I going to do that's cognitively interesting? What am I going to do to look after my mental health or emotional well-being? And what am I going to do that's fun? And making sure that my week is built up of a balance of all of these things, or that at the very least my month is built up of a balance of these things, because I've got a really busy couple of weeks. So it's a really simple model of health, but if you're only using one of the 4 circles for long periods of time, then that's when that sympathetic nervous system is on, you're using the wrong hormones, and over time that leads to mental and physical illness. So last slide I wanted to show you was, here are some book recommendations. If you can see me, there are so many books, brilliant books about health. This book, if you want to write a birthday, if you want a Christmas present to yourself or to all of the women in your life, this is the place to start. Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom, Dr. Christina Mercer. Honestly, I bought it in my early 20s. I have given it to everyone I know. It is the place to start. And that's to go further into all of these topics. But then you've got lots of, books on periods now, how the pill changes everything, Wild Power. This is just a couple of them. And I put on Red School, which is where I started to do all of my menstruality understanding, written by Red School. Was started by Alexandra Pope, whose latest book was Wild Power. That is about the cycle. They do an awful lot of online trainings now. So they have online trainings you can do about menstrual cycle awareness, about menarche, about menopause, about understanding this stuff. Elaine, my very good friend Elaine, she does a 10-week mindfulness course. But what she does is she's done a master's in mindfulness, and she's amazing at mindfulness, cognitive behavioral therapy. But she does a 10-week course about mindful menstrual cycle. So it's where mindfulness meets the menstrual cycle, and it's done over 10 weeks so that you experience going through 2 cycles together with her. Also perimenopausal people on it as well, so it's not just for that. Sean, I would start with this book, which I think is a really good book to start with. It's The Period Repair Manual by Lara Briden. That has that and Alexandra's book have really good basic, not basic, it's very complicated, but they are the place to start when looking into period stuff. My knowledge of PMDD is that it's a relatively new diagnosis. So what I would suggest is start with, the wider book is Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdoms, but their Period Repair Manual. Let me have a look whether there's something in it while I'm talking. But then if it's not got enough in there, email me, because I know that my friend Lisa, who is in Ireland, is doing a lot of work on PMDD at the moment, so I can link you up with her. She used to suffer. Oh yes, there is PMDDs in here. It's there's 13 pages on it, definition and what to do. So I would start with this. If you need any more help, just let me know and I will link you up with Lisa. I also put on here Clue, which is an app you can download. There are now loads of apps. So what I do by a piece of paper every day, you can now buy an app, and that app Clue, or lots of them, I think Clue is the one that I hear most women talking about, is a way of an app helping you do your menstrual cycle tracking and checking where you are, so that you can then look for patterns. What you're looking for here is patterns, and you're looking for whether that physical or mental response or emotional response or feeling or how you are is linked to the cycle and how. Use Garmin, brilliant. So I didn't know you could use Garmin for that, so that's perfect, Callie, thank you. So that's kind of where I wanted to get to. I've got no idea of the time either. I'm happy to take some more questions. I'm happy if you email me. Here is my email. I know there's 2 other things I have been asked to tell you about. I will come back to my slide with my contact details in a minute. But one of them is this, is that there is another We Are Virtual one, which is in January, From Chaos to Calm, the simple formula to help you cope with the unexpected. So do look out for that. And the other thing I wanted to say to you is I'm running my first, I'm very excited about it, half-day workshop for women's health and mental health in late January with We Are the City. Some fantastic speakers. We'll do a whole chunk on menstruality and where that meets menopause, but I've got amazing people talking about female nutrition and female mental health and stuff. So it's a bit more of an explanation. You know, so those are two things to look out for. But in the meantime, you know, like I said, it's about starting to empower your decisions with knowledge and reading. You know, reading, finding what works for you, finding what doesn't work for you, figuring it out. And you know, if you need me at any time or you want to answer a question, then please do email me below. Any other questions? So this is my dad enthused about Apple. Why wasn't that self-cycling? That's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant. And Amanda, I have got no idea why we aren't taught it at school. My 7-year-old daughter, well, she's six-year-old daughter. One of my friends who I met through this amazing work, she's called Tessa Sanderson, writes children's books. She's got one which is sort of aimed at 4 to about 8 for girls, which talks about their bits and stuff like that, and then one which is a bit older for little girls going into menarche and understanding this stuff. She's just done a boys one, and it makes me laugh because my 6-year-old daughter was walking down the street telling a friend of ours who's sort of male and in his 60s that she was born with all of her eggs and all of these sorts of things. And so I don't know why we weren't taught it at school, and I think that's part of the problem with a lot of the women's health and mental health stuff. There's all of the societal impact around the role of a woman and a mother, but there's also the actually not even feeling connected to your own body and who you are and your experiencing. We live on a planet where we have full moons and you know, we have full moons and new moons. We have tides, we have you know, seasons, but for some reason when it comes to bodies of human beings, especially women who go through those very same cycles, we're not taught how to use it or to link it up. Interestingly, my last point was that a lot of the research shows that women in not Western societies, but in less westernized ones, tend to cycle with the moon. So women tend to ovulate at the full moon and have their periods at the new moon, which goes in with that cycle I was telling you about, autumn and winter and summer and stuff. And actually, I think there's evidence now to show that women are most likely to kill themselves just before their periods, because they're in that period of, it's just before the new moon, it's just before that, it's very unbounded, and there's such an impact on our physical and mental health and being contained in that little period just before we bleed, that's when we're our most intense and intuitive if you're connected to it, but it can also be very scary. Right, I will stop unless someone else has something else really helpful. You need to get my stress, well, hopefully. No worries, Arlene. And if you need anything, just email me, or you know how to get hold of me anyway. So perfect. Thank you very much. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to stop, or We Are the City, or anyone, but there you go. Thank you. Thank you. I hope that was helpful.